What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I'm stoked to have you guys here, and thank you for tapping in with your boy one more video at a time. Today I'm super stoked because one, I never thought I would own a Leica. Seriously. Two, I never thought I would own an only black and white camera, and I really wanted to be the guy to bridge the gap from the people that don't know and the people that may want to know more about this camera but just think that it's an absurd price and not really worth the cost. So let's just dive right into it and jump in. I recently picked up a Leica Q2 Monochrom, and this is the first Leica camera that I've ever owned or ever actually really wanted to own. First off, we'll go aesthetics alone. I'm a really big fan of the Leica build quality, and I love the way that this camera is machined and manufactured. I know that Leicas are very sought after and expensive cameras, and I really don't like the idea of the badging and all of the big red dot that there's their signature logo. I live in Kansas City. It's kind of rough here. I'm kind of a rough guy myself. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, I really don't like the idea of carrying a really expensive camera around that has a lot of badges on it that everybody may just know what I have. I really like the sleek and design features that just eliminate all of that Leica badging on here. There's no color on this camera at all. It would make sense because it's a black and white only camera, but I like that everything is just monoed out. The only Leica insignia is right here on the back where it says Leica, and then it says Q2, Leica Q2, and then it says Monochrom up here, which is just engraved into the camera. Outside of that, you would not know this is a Leica unless you were a camera person, but the average Joe probably wouldn't know about it. Now let's talk about how I acquired this camera. I came across a really good deal for this, one that I could not pass up, and I have always been intrigued by the idea of shooting a mono sensor and black and white only. I am a very big black and white film guy, and it crossed my mind that maybe having a black and white sensor camera might, one, keep me from shooting so much film because the price has become insane lately, but two, it might help me just bring a different creative aspect to my photography, because I do shoot photography and video as a full-time job. Sometimes it can become monotonous doing photo and then going out on the weekend and doing photo for fun. So having, like you guys know me, having a fun camera always brings that sense of excitement back into my personal photography, and I love the idea of just doing something so drastically different from what I always do. And I just really wanted to try a black and white sensor only camera. With that being said, this camera is not as big, pause, as I assumed it was gonna be. It is relatively small. This is it compared to my Sony a7C2. They are almost the same size with no lens on it. And if I put the 40mm on my Sony, it is almost the exact same size as the Q, which I think is relatively pretty cool. I thought this was going to be a much bigger camera and that it might adhere me to wanting to take it out as an everyday camera, but it does not. It fits in my Wander 3-liter sling easy or my Evergreen 2-liter, and I can actually carry this everywhere I go, even though that sounds kind of crazy with this being such an expensive camera. If you aren't familiar, this retails, I want to say, for around $5,000. I don't know exactly. I think the resale market is around maybe 4,000, somewhere in that ballpark. That's a lot of money. That is a huge amount of money for a camera, especially a fun camera. I do not think that this camera is for everyone. It is not. This is for the person that really loves their photography and really wants to utilize a different experience when it comes to shooting and making photos. I do not recommend this camera for 90% of photographers. Yes, you can switch any camera that you own to black and white and get relatively the same image when looking at it on a phone. That is what I used to think. I never could fathom the reason why somebody would spend such a large amount of money on a camera until I was the person who get the camera. First off, if you looked at the beginning of the video and you saw the unboxing, Leica makes it an experience. They make it something that the average camera company does not. No disrespect to Sony, I love Sony, but if I open a Sony camera, there's a battery charger and a camera. Plastic, cardboard, wrapping, boxing, all that stuff. The Leica, it has this like almost origami folding out experience. There's drawers in it, there's foam padding, there's neck strap, there's lens hoods, there's, you know what I mean? There's just there's just everything that comes with the camera that, one, should come with the camera that costs $5,000, but two, it's a real, like, for lack of better words, good old boys club, and it's just a group of people that understand the experience. Two, when it comes to shooting experience itself, it is a vast difference from shooting like my Sony or an X100 or something. It just feels so, it's fun. I can just say that it's fun. Is it $5,000 fun? I don't know. Maybe it is to you, maybe it's not. Third, let's just hop into the files. It is so hard to explain to someone that has not actually used one or seen the files, the tonality and the tonage of grays, right? It's all 18% gray, but there's different tonal ranges of grays. The highlights, the shadows, the information that is stored amongst both. It's just really, it's hard to explain because once I take a black and white photo and I share it in this video, I share it on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, my great grandmother's Flickr account. Who cares? It's hard to look at it and see the difference from anybody else's black and white. But when you look at it on a computer screen, if I turn around and I pull it up on my monitor and I see an actual photo, it is just insane the amount of tonality and image quality and dynamic range, even though there's no color, of how it's just very expansive, and that's probably the best way I can say it. And you really won't get that experience unless you see it on a monitor and not on a cell phone. On a cell phone, it's gonna look just like 90% of other black and white photos. Now, with them looking like all of the other black and white photos, that's another reason why this just may not be the camera for you, or it may be. It just depends on the person. I don't think you should dictate whether a camera is for you based on the response it gets from other people, but more so the response that you get from the camera and the feeling when using it. I personally have been loving shooting black and white lately, and having a mono only sensor, it kind of takes away that curiosity I may have with wanting to shoot color, wanting to shoot black and white, trying to dictate what is right for that moment. But only shooting black and white has almost limited me to the point where you kind of have to be more creative with shadows, highlights, composition, and it just makes you think a little differently than worrying about the pastel tones or the white balance, or, you know what I mean? The dynamic range of a certain image and how you can manipulate it in post. I kind of like removing that factor and challenging myself in a different area. Let's talk about low light performance. One of the huge pluses about this camera is the low light performance. It may not sound very cool, or it may not be that interesting to a huge amount of people, but the low light performance on this camera is impeccable. You can shoot in the darkest of scenarios at the highest of ISOs. I mean, there's a couple images that I posted in the very beginning of the video that were shot at 50,000 ISO, and there's very, very minimal noise. I think that is one of the hugest pluses in a mono only sensor, or just the way that the sensor was developed, that there's just not a ton of noise at really high ISO ranges on this camera. I have been able to test around with it and shooting it in almost, I don't want to say pitch black, but shooting it in extreme dark scenarios, and there's still a usable image at a very high ISO range is pretty impeccable. I think that is a very big drawing factor that may get kind of overlooked from other cameras. There are some drawbacks that are pretty notable as well. The autofocus is severely lacking on this camera. Manual focus is fun. The EVF is nice, but I always kind of look at it from a different area or a different avenue. I was talking to my buddy about this, and I think it's kind of different because when you buy a Leica or you shoot a camera like a Q2, you're not necessarily looking for the fastest autofocus. You're not necessarily relying on having the most top-notch performance in a camera because you're shooting it for an experience or a feeling. And I think that outweighs the technicalities in autofocus performance and maybe in some of the areas where the camera is lacking. Now, I can see that also being on the other side of the street, being devil's advocate, like who's paying $5,000 for a camera that has severely lacking autofocus performance? And I'm not sure that that's a bad question to have, but I also think there's a different use case scenario. Some people buy the Ricoh GR3s or the Fuji X100Vs, and they don't necessarily have the greatest autofocus performance, but they're fun, they're small, they're tactile, they're useful, the color ranges are great. So it has a lot of benefits that outweigh the negatives in a certain light. I think that's okay. I have never used this Q2M so far and said, man, I wish the autofocus was better, because I just understand, right? In certain scenarios, I shoot at manual focus because I know that the autofocus isn't necessarily the best feature. I will say I love the manual focus. It does have a zoom to manual focus. So whenever you manual focus, it'll zoom in on a certain specific area. And it also focus peaks that area to let you know exactly what area is in focus. And I think that is a extremely underrated feature when it comes to manually focusing, and it also adds another sense of fun into using this camera. And that just adds to the user experience department of this camera, which is another reason that makes it so fun to shoot. So I'll be honest, the Leica Q2M is a special camera. It's a different camera. This is not a camera that's meant for everyone. It's meant for a select few people that understand it and enjoy it and want to utilize it to its fullest capabilities. That doesn't mean you should go get one, or maybe you should. Maybe this video was your sign that you were going to go get a Q2M. Go get one. They're fantastic cameras. What do you think about the Q2M? Leave me a comment below and tell me, what are your thoughts on having a black and white only camera? Is that a waste of money? I'm sure a lot of you will say that. Maybe a lot of you won't. Like always, I appreciate you guys for being here. Tap that like button, subscribe, leave a comment, share with your friend. Tell me how you feel about Leicas and their monochrome sensor cameras. And until next time, I love you guys. Be easy.